The evening sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Meridian Tower as Elliot Chen pushed his cleaning cart through the nearly empty lobby. Most of the office workers had gone home, leaving behind only the faint echo of closing elevator doors and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with lemon-scented floor cleaner. At 58, Elliot's back ached a little more each year, but he moved with the careful precision of someone who took pride in his work, no matter what that work was. The grand piano sitting in the corner of the lobby gleamed under the soft lighting. It had appeared 3 weeks ago, a personal touch from Margaret Reynolds, the new CEO who had taken over Meridian Investments with bold ideas and even bolder decisions. Elliot paused near it every evening, allowing himself a moment to admire the craftsmanship before carefully dusting its surface. "Careful with that," a security guard called out as he passed by. "That thing probably costs more than both our yearly salaries put together." Elliot nodded and smiled politely. "I'm always careful, Ben." He ran his cloth gently over the fallboard that covered the keys, his touch reverent. What the security guard didn't know, what nobody in this building knew, was that Elliot understood exactly how to handle a piano like this. The lobby of Meridian Tower was designed to impress, with its 30-foot ceilings, contemporary art, installations, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The piano was just the latest addition to create what the internal memo had called a more cultured atmosphere for clients and employees alike. To Elliot, who had spent the last 12 years cleaning these floors, it was like seeing an old friend in an unexpected place. As he worked his way around the piano, wiping down the bench and polishing the brass pedals, he could hear voices approaching from the bank of elevators. He straightened up and moved his cart aside, making himself nearly invisible as he'd learned to do over the years. The cleaning staff were like ghosts in the building, present but unseen, necessary but overlooked. A group of executives emerged, led by Margaret Reynolds herself. At 46, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought her way to the top. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that somehow looked both effortless and expensive. Unlike some of the other executives, she usually acknowledged the cleaning staff with a nod or a quick smile. Tonight, she was deep in conversation with 4 other suits, important people whose names Elliot had learned only because he emptied their trash bins and cleaned their office bathrooms. "The Henderson deal is practically signed," said a tall man with silver hair, Howard from legal. Their team was impressed with the presentation. "They should be," Margaret replied. "We spent enough time getting it right." The group paused near the reception desk, apparently in no hurry to leave despite the late hour. Elliot kept his eyes down, focusing on a stubborn scuff mark on the floor while staying aware of their positions. Years of cleaning around people had taught him how to be present without being in the way. "Hey, what about that?" The marketing director, a younger man named Patrick, who always left coffee rings on his desk, pointed toward the piano. "Any of you actually play that thing, or is it just for show?" The finance guy, Elliot thought his name was Gregory, laughed. "I took lessons for about 3 months when I was 10. Does that count?" "My daughter plays," said the woman in the group, Vivian from HR. "She hates every minute of it, but her grandmother insists." Patrick wandered over to the piano, lifting the fallboard and pressing a few random keys that produced a jarring, discordant sound. Elliot winced internally but kept his expression neutral as he moved his cleaning supplies to the next section of the floor. "I had you all pegged as more the jazz club type," Margaret said, joining Patrick by the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, playing a simple scale that at least had the benefit of being in tune. "Jazz, sure. But the real test would be classical," Patrick said, attempting to play something that might have been the beginning of Für Elise before hitting a wrong note and giving up. "Nobody plays classical anymore, it's too hard." "Chopin," Howard said suddenly, looking at the piano with a distant expression. "My mother used to play Chopin. Those nocturnes would put me to sleep as a kid." "That's some difficult stuff," Gregory agreed. "I doubt anyone in this building could play Chopin properly." Margaret laughed, the sound bouncing off the high ceiling. "You know what? I bet you're right." She closed the fallboard with a gentle thud. "But wouldn't it be something if they could?" Elliot had moved to the large windows now, spray bottle and cloth in hand, methodically removing fingerprints. He worked steadily, but his ears were tuned to the conversation. Chopin had been his specialty once upon a time. "What would you give to hear someone in this company play Chopin properly?" Patrick asked with a grin. "I'd pay good money." Margaret's eyes sparkled with sudden mischief. She glanced around at her colleagues, all of them relaxed after a successful day, perhaps a drink or two at the office celebration earlier. "You know what?" she said, her voice carrying across the lobby. "If anyone in this building can play Chopin, I mean really play it beautifully, I'll marry them on the spot." The group erupted in laughter. Elliot's hand paused mid-wipe, his heart giving a strange little jump at the words. He kept his back to the executives, pretending to be absorbed in his work. "That's one way to find a husband," Vivian joked. "Better than those dating apps my sister keeps telling me about." "I'm serious," Margaret said, though her tone was playful. "I've been single for 3 years now. My mother keeps sending me links to dating sites for busy professionals. Maybe this is the solution." "So what are you looking for?" Gregory asked. "A specific piece, some kind of audition?" Margaret tapped her chin thoughtfully. "The Nocturne in E-flat major, Opter 9, number 2. She said the name with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "Play that beautifully, and I'll be impressed enough to consider matrimony." Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The Nocturne in E-flat major had been his signature piece, the one that had once earned him a standing ovation at Carnegie Hall. His fingers twitched involuntarily against the glass. "Well, that rules me out," Patrick said with a laugh. "I can barely play chopsticks." "I don't think you have to worry about sudden marriage proposals," Howard said dryly. "Most people in this building probably can't tell Chopin from Beethoven." "Their loss," Margaret said, checking her watch. "All right, I should head out. Early meeting tomorrow with the Tokyo team." The group moved toward the revolving doors, their conversation shifting to dinner plans and tomorrow's schedule. Elliot kept cleaning, moving systematically from one window to the next, but his thoughts were miles away, or perhaps years away, back to concert halls and music conservatories, to a life he had packed away as carefully as his old tuxedo, a xiao. The executives pushed through the revolving doors into the night. Margaret paused, looking back at the piano. For a brief moment, her confident expression softened into something wistful. Then she was gone, following her colleagues into the warm spring evening. Elliot waited until the lobby was empty before approaching the piano again. His hands, now, rough and calloused from years of scrubbing and cleaning, hovered over the closed fallboard. He wanted so badly to open it, to feel the cool ivory beneath his fingers again. But the security cameras blinked their red lights from the corners of the ceiling, and he knew better than to risk his job for a moment of nostalgia. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket and checked the time. His shift ended in 45 minutes. His daughter May would be calling soon for their nightly check-in. She was in her second year of college, studying business on a partial scholarship that barely covered half the costs. The rest came from Elliot's salary and the small savings his late wife had left them. Just last week, May had mentioned the rising cost of textbooks, her voice carefully casual in that way she had when trying not to worry him about money. Elliot put his phone away and returned to his cleaning cart. As he pushed it toward the restrooms for his final rounds, he glanced back at the piano one more time. Nocturne in E-flat major, he whispered to himself, the notes already playing in his head, muscle memory making his fingers twitch against the cart handle. Opter 9, number 2. A small, secret smile crossed his face as he pushed through the restroom door. Sometimes life had a strange way of bringing the past back around when you least expected it. The bus rumbled along the early morning route, swaying gently as it navigated through city streets still quiet before rush hour. Elliot sat by the window, his lunch bag on his lap, watching buildings slip past in the pale dawn light. His fingers drummed a silent rhythm on his thigh, the opening measures of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. 3 stops before his, an elderly woman with a cello case boarded the bus. She nodded at Elliot in recognition. They'd shared this same early bus for years. He smiled back, eyeing the worn case with a familiar ache. Some mornings they would chat about classical music, but today both sat in comfortable silence, lost in their own thoughts. Elliot's apartment was on the third floor of an older building in a neighborhood that had once been affordable for working families but was now slowly filling with young professionals who couldn't quite afford downtown. His key stuck in the lock as always, requiring the special jiggle he'd perfected over the years. Inside, the space was small, but meticulously kept, a habit from his cleaning job that had spilled into his personal life, or perhaps it had been the other way around. The living room told a different story than his janitorial uniform suggested. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with music theory texts, biographies of famous composers, and dog-eared sheet music collections. Above his worn couch hung 3 framed photographs that looked out of place in the modest apartment. A younger Elliot in a tuxedo at Carnegie Hall, Elliot with his wife Lynn after a performance in Boston, and Elliot sitting at a gleaming concert grand piano, his hands caught mid-performance, his face transformed with the joy of creating music. But it was what sat in the corner that truly revealed Elliot's hidden life. An upright piano, not fancy or new, but lovingly maintained. The finish was worn around the edges where hands had touched it thousands of times, and a small chip on one corner told the story of its journey up 3 flights of stairs years ago. Elliot placed his keys in the small bowl by the door and moved directly to the piano. He didn't bother removing his jacket or even turning on more lights. His fingers found the keys with the certainty of old friends reuniting, and he began to play. Softly, mindful of his neighbors, but with feeling. The nocturne in E-flat major flowed from his hands as naturally as breathing, the notes hanging in the air of his small apartment like delicate crystal. When he finished, the silence felt heavier somehow. Elliot flexed his hands, noting the stiffness in his joints that hadn't been there in his younger years. 12 years of scrubbing floors and cleaning bathrooms had taken their toll, but his technique remained. Different, perhaps. More raw, more emotional, but still there, buried beneath calloused fingertips and slight arthritis. His phone rang, breaking the moment. Elliot smiled at the screen, a picture of May in her college sweatshirt grinning widely. "Dad, I was worried you might still be at work." May's voice came through, bright and energetic despite the early hour. "Just got home," Elliot said, switching to Mandarin as they often did in private conversations. "Shouldn't you be studying? I've been up all night finishing a paper, business ethics," she groaned. "But I got it done and I think it's good." "Of course it's good. You work hard." Pride warmed Elliot's voice. After his wife died when May was just 12, raising her alone had become his purpose, the reason he'd set aside his music career without regret. "Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something." Her tone shifted, becoming more cautious. "The tuition bill for next semester came in, and there's been another increase." Elliot's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "How much?" "Almost 8%. Plus the dorm costs are going up too." She paused. "I was thinking maybe I could move off campus, get some roommates. It might be cheaper. And be further from your classes? With people we don't know?" Elliot shook his head, though she couldn't see him. "No, we'll figure something out. Did you apply for those scholarships we talked about?" "I did, but they're competitive. I won't hear back for weeks." May hesitated again. "What about that promotion you mentioned, the head custodian position?" Elliot glanced at the piano, then back at the photos on his wall. "I have an interview next week. It would mean more money, but also more hours." "You already work so much," May said softly. "I could take another part-time job." "Absolutely not. Your studies come first." Elliot's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, I had an idea. I might be able to give piano lessons on weekends. There are families in my building with children." What he didn't tell her was how little that would actually help. The promotion would add perhaps $3 an hour to his wage, not enough to cover the tuition increase. And piano lessons in his neighborhood might bring in a little extra, but nothing substantial. Not like when he used to command hundreds of dollars per hour teaching the children of wealthy families back when his name still appeared in concert programs. "You haven't taught in years," May said. "But you should. You light up when you play." Elliot smiled sadly. We'll figure it out. We always do. After they hung up, Elliot sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing his bank account on his old laptop. The numbers were discouraging. His savings, carefully built over years of frugal living, had dwindled with each semester of May's education. There was enough for the tuition increase, but not much beyond that. And May would need money for graduate school applications soon if she wanted to pursue her MBA dreams. The head custodian job would help, but not enough. He needed something more, something that used his real skills. Teaching piano again was an option, but building a student base would take time they didn't have. Elliot closed his laptop and returned to the piano, this time opening the bench to rifle through old sheet music. His fingers found what they were looking for: the yellowed pages of Chopin's nocturnes published by his old conservatory. The spine cracked as he opened it to Op. 9, number 2. Notes crowded the page, along with penciled annotations from his student days. He placed the music on the stand and began to play again, this time with more intention, focusing on the passages that had grown rusty with disuse. As he played, his mind drifted to Margaret Reynolds and her casual challenge in the lobby. If anyone in this building can play Chopin beautifully, I'll marry them on the spot. She hadn't meant it, of course. It was the kind of joke wealthy people made when they were feeling generous with the world. The kind of careless comment someone makes when they've never had to worry about tuition increases or choosing between paying the electric bill or buying new shoes. But what if? The question danced around the edges of Elliot's mind as his fingers moved across the keys. What if he did play for her? What would happen? Best case scenario, she might be impressed enough to offer him some kind of opportunity. Worst case, he could lose his job for using the company piano without permission. Was it worth the risk? His playing shifted, becoming more passionate as he reached the emotional center of the piece. This was the section that had once moved audiences to tears. His hands remembered, even if the rest of the world had forgotten the promising young pianist he'd once been. The sound of his upstairs neighbor thumping on the floor brought him back to reality. Elliot stopped playing mid-phrase, glancing at his watch. Almost 6 in the morning. He'd been playing longer than he realized. "Sorry," he called out, though he knew his neighbor couldn't hear the apology through the ceiling. As he prepared for bed, his schedule as a night custodian meant sleeping during the day. Elliot's mind kept returning to the piano in Meridian Tower's lobby. It was a much finer instrument than his worn upright. The sound it could produce in those soaring acoustics would be magnificent. He lay in bed, sunlight pressing against his blackout curtains, and made a decision. He wouldn't play during working hours or risk his job. But perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a moment, after his shift, when the building was empty except for security, when he could sit at that beautiful piano and let his fingers remember who he used to be. Not for Margaret Reynolds and her careless promise. Not even for the remote possibility of some better opportunity. But for himself, and for May, and for the music that had once been his entire world. As sleep finally claimed him, Elliot's last thoughts were of Chopin's notes dancing through the empty lobby of Meridian Tower, rising up toward the vaulted ceiling, free and beautiful in the darkness. 3 nights passed before Elliot found the courage. 3 nights of cleaning around the grand piano, running his cloth over its polished surface, watching it sit silent and waiting in the corner of the lobby. 3 nights of hearing Chopin's notes in his head, his fingers itching to touch the keys. On the 3rd night, everything aligned perfectly. The weather had turned nasty, a spring storm that sent sheets of rain against the lobby's glass walls and kept most of the cleaning crew eager to finish early and get home. Elliot volunteered to lock up, assuring his supervisor he would finish the last of the lobby work. "You sure, Chen? Don't like the thought of you catching that late bus in this weather," his supervisor said, zipping up his raincoat. "I'll be fine," Elliot replied with a small smile. "My daughter's staying at a friend's place near campus tonight, so no one's waiting for me anyway." The last of his co-workers left at 11:30, umbrellas unfurled against the downpour. The security guard, Tom, did his final walkthrough at midnight, nodding to Elliot as he buffed the floor near the reception desk. "Heading to the break room for my lunch," Tom said, stifling a yawn. "Back in 30 if you need anything." Elliot nodded, keeping his eyes on his work. Tom's break room was on the third floor where he could watch his security monitors while eating. It was as close to privacy as Elliot could hope for. As Tom's footsteps faded, Elliot slowed the buffer and switched it off. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the soft patter of rain against glass. He glanced at the bank of elevators, all dark now, no executives working late tonight. Just Elliot and the piano and the empty lobby with its soaring ceiling. His heart pounded as he walked toward the grand piano. This wasn't like him. He followed rules, kept his head down, did his job without complaint. Playing the company piano after hours definitely wasn't in his job description. But something about Margaret Reynolds's casual challenge had awakened something in him, something that had been sleeping for too many years. Elliot removed his work gloves and set them on top of the piano. His hands looked wrong to him suddenly. Rough, red in places with calluses that hadn't come from piano keys. He flexed his fingers, feeling the slight stiffness in the joints, wondering if they would remember what to do. The piano bench made no sound as he pulled it out. He sat down, adjusting his position out of habit, back straight, shoulders relaxed, feet positioned near the pedals. The fallboard lifted smoothly under his touch, revealing the keys that gleamed in the lobby's dimmed nighttime lighting. For why? A long moment Elliot just sat there, hands hovering above the keys, doubt creeping in. What was he doing? Who was he trying to fool? He wasn't a concert pianist anymore. He was a janitor pushing 60 with a bad back and worn-out hands. Maybe it was better to leave the past in the past. A flash of lightning illuminated the lobby, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the building. In that brief, bright moment, Elliot caught sight of his reflection in the polished surface of the piano. Not the janitor in his gray uniform, but the shadow of the musician he once was. His fingers touched the keys. The first notes of the nocturne, in E-flat major, filled the empty space, tentative at first, like a man testing thin ice. Then muscle memory took over, and the music began to flow more naturally. His left hand found the gentle, rolling rhythm, while his right spun out the delicate melody that had once been as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Elliot closed his eyes, letting himself be carried away. The stiffness in his fingers seemed to melt as they warmed up, moving more freely across the keys. This piano was far superior to his old upright at home. Each note rang clear and true, sustaining perfectly, the action smooth under his touch. As he moved deeper into the piece, his body began to sway slightly with the music. This was the Chopin he remembered, the composer who had spoken to him since he was a boy, romantic, emotional, technically demanding, but always in service to the feeling. The melody soared and retreated, like waves against a shore, building and receding with a natural rhythm that couldn't be taught, only felt. In his mind, Elliot was no longer in the corporate lobby. He was on stage again, under the lights, playing for people who had come specifically to hear him bring this music to life. The years fell away, and he was that promising young pianist again, the one music critics had called a rare talent and a true interpreter of Chopin. The middle section of the nocturne grew more intense, and Elliot leaned into it, his dynamics shifting from the gentle piano to a more assertive mezzo forte. His foot worked the pedal with precision, creating that characteristic Chopin wash of sound without muddying the notes. This was the part where he had always added his own slight interpretation, a barely perceptible hesitation before certain notes, a subtle emphasis that wasn't marked in the score but felt right to him. As the piece returned to its main theme, Elliot felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest, the joy of making music that had been missing from his life for too long. Each phrase was shaped with care, each note given its proper weight and duration. This wasn't just playing. This was speaking through the piano, telling a story that needed no words. The final section approached, and Elliot handled the ornamental notes with the delicacy that belied his work-roughened hands. The trills and turns flowed from his fingers as if he had been practicing daily for years, not playing on a tired upright in stolen moments between work shifts. When the final notes faded away, Elliot kept his foot on the sustain pedal, letting the sound linger in the air for as long as possible. He didn't want it to end, this moment of reconnection with his true self. His eyes remained closed, his body still leaning slightly forward, hands poised above the keys as the last vibrations died away. And then, from behind him, came the sound of quiet applause. Elliot's eyes flew open, his body tensing as he twisted around on the bench. Standing by the reception desk, a portfolio clutched in one hand, was Margaret Reynolds. "Don't stop on my account," she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly across the lobby. "That was beautiful." Elliot stood quickly, nearly knocking over the bench. His heart hammered in his chest, but not from the music now. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." She raised a hand, cutting off his apology. "Please don't apologize for something like that." She moved closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Tonight she wore a dark blue dress with a light coat draped over her arm, as elegant at midnight as she was during business hours. "I had no idea we had such talent on our staff." Elliot's mouth felt dry. I finished my shift and..." He stopped, unable to come up with a reasonable explanation for why he was playing the company piano at midnight. Margaret set her portfolio down on top of the piano. That was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9, No. 2. She tilted her head, studying him with open curiosity. "You played it beautifully." Elliot stood straighter, old instincts kicking in, the posture of a performer receiving feedback. "Thank you," he said simply, not knowing what else to add. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Margaret asked, genuine interest in her voice. "That wasn't amateur playing. That was..." She seemed to search for the right word. "Professional. Trained." "I studied at Juilliard," Elliot said, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so many years. "A long time ago." Margaret's eyes widened. "Juilliard? And now you're..." She stopped, seeming to realize how the question would sound. "Now I'm a janitor," Elliot finished for her, no bitterness in his tone. "Life takes unexpected turns sometimes." A moment of awkward silence stretched between them. Elliot began to reach for his gloves, thinking only of how to end this encounter, and whether he would still have a job tomorrow. "Why are you here so late?" he asked, trying to shift the focus away from himself. Margaret sighed, gesturing to her portfolio. "Forgot some papers for an early meeting tomorrow. Realized it halfway home and had to turn around." She glanced out at the rain still beating against the windows. "Lucky timing, I guess. Otherwise I would have missed your performance." Elliot nodded, uncertain what to say. In the distance he could hear the elevator ding, Tom returning from his break, no doubt. "I should finish up," Elliot said, reaching for the fallboard to close it. "Wait," Margaret said quickly. She looked at him with an intensity that made him pause. "You heard what I said the other night, didn't you? About marrying anyone who could play Chopin." Elliot felt heat rise in his face. "I heard, but I know it was just a joke." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "It was, but the sentiment behind it wasn't entirely untrue." She moved closer to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "I've always believed that music reveals something essential about a person, especially how they play Chopin." The elevator doors opened, and Tom stepped out, stopping short when he saw them. "Evening, Ms. Reynolds. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Tom," Margaret replied without taking her eyes off Elliot. "Mr. Chen was just..." She paused. "Showing me something important." Tom nodded and retreated to his desk, though Elliot could feel his curious gaze. Margaret lowered her voice. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee, Mr. Chen? There's an all-night diner around the corner. I'd like to hear your story. How a Juilliard graduate ends up cleaning Meridian Tower at midnight." Elliot hesitated, his mind racing. This wasn't how he'd expected the night to end. I have a car," she said simply. "I can drive you home afterward." Something in her expression made Elliot realize this wasn't just polite interest or a boss's concern. She genuinely wanted to know more, and something in him, the part that had pushed him to play tonight in the first place, wanted to tell her. "All right," he said finally. "Just let me put away my supplies." As he closed the fallboard gently and gathered his gloves, Elliot felt like he was standing at a crossroads. Behind him lay 12 years of routine, of invisibility, of being just another member of the cleaning staff. Ahead, unknown territory opened up, all because he had dared to play Chopin in an empty lobby during a thunderstorm. Margaret waited by the reception desk, her portfolio tucked under her arm, watching him with unreadable eyes. "Ready?" she asked, when he approached. Elliot nodded, suddenly aware of his gray uniform, his worn shoes, his hands that still bore traces of cleaning supplies despite his thorough washing. None of it seemed to matter to Margaret Reynolds as she smiled and led the way toward the revolving doors, out into the rain-washed night. The all-night diner sat on the corner 2 blocks from Meridian Tower, its windows glowing warm yellow against the rainy darkness. Despite the late hour, a handful of customers occupied booths, night shift workers, a couple of college students with laptops, and now, improbably, a CEO and a janitor sitting across from each other in a corner booth. Elliot cradled his coffee mug between his hands, the warmth seeping into his fingers that still tingled from playing the piano. Margaret sat opposite him, her own cup untouched as she studied him with undisguised curiosity. "Juilliard," she said again, shaking her head slightly. "And you were good. Really good. That wasn't just someone who took lessons as a kid." Elliot gave a small, self-conscious smile. "I was a concert pianist, or at least I was becoming one." "What happened?" The waitress appeared with their order, a plate of toast for Elliot, who hadn't realized how hungry he was until they'd sat down, and a slice of apple pie for Margaret. "Life happened," Elliot said after the waitress left. He spread butter on his toast, buying time to gather his thoughts. It had been years since he'd talked about this with anyone besides May. "I was 30 when things started to change. I'd been playing professionally for almost a decade, building a decent reputation. Nothing world famous, but I was making a living, getting good reviews, playing with respected orchestras. And then?" Margaret prompted gently when he paused. "My hands." Elliot set down his toast and held out his hands, palm up. "Carpal tunnel syndrome in both wrists. Severe. The doctor said I needed surgery, then extensive physical therapy, with no guarantee I could return to professional level playing." Margaret winced in sympathy. "That must have been devastating." "It was," Elliot admitted. "But the timing made it worse. My wife Lynn was pregnant with our daughter. We just bought a small house, taking on a mortgage based on my performing income and her part-time teaching. The medical bills were piling up. I couldn't afford to stop working for months of recovery with no certain outcome." He took a sip of his coffee, the bitter warmth fortifying him to continue. "So I made a choice. I found other work. Office jobs. At first, then maintenance and cleaning when those paid better and offered more flexible hours. Lynn could teach music full-time while I took care of our daughter in the evenings. It was supposed to be temporary." "But it wasn't," Margaret said, softly. Elliot shook his head. "Lynn got sick when May was 10. Cancer. She fought for 2 years, but—" He left the sentence unfinished. "After she was gone, I became both parents to May. The cleaning work let me be there when she needed me, nights while she slept, home before she left for school." He hadn't meant to share so much, but something about the quiet diner, the rain pattering against the windows, and Margaret's attentive silence made the words flow easily. "And your daughter now?" Margaret asked. At this, Elliot's expression brightened. "May is in college. Business major with a minor in music. She's brilliant. Scholarships, dean's list. She wants to go on for her MBA. You must be very proud." "Every day," Elliot said, the simple words carrying the weight of his devotion. Margaret finally took a bite of her pie, considering him over the fork. "And the piano? Do you still play regularly?" "I have an old upright at home. Nothing like your grand piano," Elliot said with a small smile. "I play when I can. Not as much as I should. My technique has suffered. You probably noticed." "I noticed no such thing," Margaret said firmly. "What I heard was beautiful, technically impressive, and played with genuine emotion. Most people go their entire lives without being able to play like that. Elliot felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. It had been so long since anyone who understood music had heard him play. "May I ask," he ventured, "how you know so much about Chopin? Most people, even those who appreciate classical music, couldn't name that specific nocturne." Something flickered across Margaret's face, a shadow of old memory. "My grandfather was a music professor. Piano was his specialty, and Chopin was his passion. He tried to teach me when I was young, but I didn't have the patience." She smiled ruefully. "I regret that now, but I spent countless hours listening to him play, especially when he thought no one was around. That nocturne was his favorite." "He had good taste," Elliot said. "He died while I was in college," Margaret continued. "Sometimes I put on recordings of Chopin when work gets overwhelming. It helps me think." She took another bite of pie, then set her fork down decisively. "Mr. Chen, Elliot, please." "Elliot." "And I'm Margaret." She leaned forward slightly. "Why are you still working as a janitor? With your talent, your training? There must be other options, teaching perhaps." Elliot had asked himself the same question many times over the years. "Teaching requires connections I no longer have. Most serious students want teachers with active performing careers or at least recent credentials. Mine are outdated, and with May's tuition—" He stopped, uncomfortable discussing financial matters. "The pay is more reliable as a janitor than trying to build a teaching studio from scratch." Margaret finished for him, understanding immediately. Elliot nodded, relieved at her perception. "What if there were another option?" Margaret said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more thoughtful. "Meridian has been trying to strengthen its community connections, particularly in the arts. The board has been after me to develop some kind of program, but I've been putting it off because I don't have the right person to lead it." Elliot set down his coffee cup, suddenly alert. "What kind of program?" "That's just it. It's not fully formed yet. We've discussed sponsoring music education in underserved schools, establishing a small performance series in our building, creating arts scholarships." Margaret's eyes grew more animated as she spoke. "What we lack is someone with actual musical knowledge and talent, who understands how to translate that into meaningful programs." "And you think I could do that?" Elliot asked, trying to keep the hope from his voice. "I know you could," Margaret said with unexpected conviction. "Your background is perfect, trained at the highest level but with experience outside the elite music circles. You understand both worlds." Elliot's mind raced with possibilities, but caution tempered his excitement. "It's an interesting idea, but wouldn't your board want someone with administrative experience? A known name in the music world?" Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Administrative skills can be learned. Authentic musical understanding and talent like yours is rare." She pulled a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. "This is my personal number. Call me tomorrow. Well, later today, I suppose, and we'll set up a proper meeting to discuss details." Elliot took the card, staring at it as if it might disappear. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Margaret replied. "But I should warn you, I can be quite persuasive when I believe in something. And after hearing you play—" She smiled. "I believe this could be remarkable." The conversation shifted then, moving to their backgrounds, their tastes in music beyond Chopin books they'd read recently. It was well past 2 in the morning when they finally left the diner, Margaret insisting on driving Elliot home despite his protests. As her luxury car pulled up outside his apartment building, Elliot felt suddenly self-conscious about its modest appearance, but Margaret didn't seem to notice or care. "Thank you for the ride," he said, hand on the door handle, "and for the coffee, and for not firing me for using the company piano without permission." Margaret laughed, the sound bright in the quiet car. "Thank you for playing it the way it deserves to be played." Her expression grew more serious. "Promise me you'll call tomorrow? This isn't just a late-night whim. I meant everything I said." "I promise," Elliot said, and was surprised to realize how much he wanted to. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, the business card safely tucked in his wallet, Elliot felt lighter than he had in years. He entered his small living room and went straight to his piano, touching its worn surface with newfound appreciation. Without turning on the lights, he sat and played the nocturne once more, his fingers finding the keys even in the darkness. This time, he played it for himself, for the boy who had once dreamed of concert halls, for the man who had set those dreams aside out of love and necessity, and perhaps, he thought, as the final notes faded into the pre-dawn stillness, for whatever new path might be opening before him. When Elliot finally went to bed, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. He set his alarm, knowing he would be exhausted, for his shift that evening. But for the first time in years, he fell asleep with a sense of possibility, rather than resignation. The next morning, Elliot woke to his phone ringing. He fumbled for it, expecting May's daily call. Instead, he saw a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" he answered, voice still thick with sleep. "Elliot? It's Margaret Reynolds." She sounded wide awake and energized. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No, it's fine," he lied, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "I couldn't wait for you to call," Margaret said, a smile evident in her voice. "I've been thinking about our conversation all night. I have a proposal for you, and I wanted to catch you before you might talk yourself out of it." Elliot swung his legs over the side of the bed, suddenly fully alert. "I'm listening. I want you to come in this morning. Not as a janitor, but as a consultant. I've scheduled a meeting with our community outreach team at 10. I'd like you to play for them exactly as you played last night and then help us brainstorm how Meridian can build a meaningful arts program." Elliot's heart raced. "Today? But I don't have... I'm not prepared." "You don't need to be," Margaret cut in gently. "Just bring yourself and your talent. Everything else we'll figure out together." After a moment's hesitation, Elliot found himself saying, "All right, I'll be there." "Wonderful," Margaret replied, and he could hear the genuine pleasure in her voice. "Oh, and Elliot, wear whatever you're comfortable in, but not your uniform. Today you're not coming in as part of the cleaning staff." As he hung up, Elliot stood and walked to his closet, pushing aside his work clothes to find the one good suit he kept for special occasions: May's school performances, Lynn's death anniversary visits to the cemetery. It would need pressing and his dress shoes would need polishing, but they would do. He caught his reflection in the mirror, noticing the smile that had appeared without his awareness. Whatever happened, today, whether this opportunity led somewhere or nowhere, something had already changed. He had played again, truly played, and been heard. And for now, that was enough. 6 months could change everything, Elliot thought as he straightened his tie in the elevator's mirrored wall. 6 months ago, he had been riding this same elevator with his cleaning cart, invisible to the executives, who stepped in and out. Today, people nodded to him in recognition, some even stopping to chat about the upcoming concert series or their children's piano lessons. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby of Meridian Tower, now transformed. The grand piano still occupied its special place, but it had been moved to create a small performance area with elegant chairs arranged in a semicircle. Posters on easels announced today's special event, Meridian Lunchtime Concert Series. Inaugural performance. Elliot's phone buzzed with a text from May. "Break a leg, Dad. Wish I could be there. Video call tonight so you can tell me everything." He smiled, typing back quickly. "Will do. Study hard." He'd tried to convince her to skip classes and come, but she had an important exam. Besides, she'd already seen him perform at several smaller events over the past months. Today was special, but it wasn't the only chance she'd have to see her father play publicly again. The lobby was already filling with people, Meridian employees from every department, invited guests from local businesses and representatives, from the music schools and community arts programs that had become partners in what everyone now called the Meridian Initiative. Elliot spotted Howard from Legal, showing a group of visitors the new plaque that explained the program's mission: to bring music education to underserved communities while creating cultural connections in the business district. It had been Howard who'd first suggested the lunchtime concert series, after hearing Elliot play at that initial meeting 6 months ago. "There's our maestro," called Patrick from marketing, walking over to shake Elliot's hand. "Ready for the big day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Elliot replied with a small smile. It still felt strange sometimes, this new role. His business card read, Director of Cultural Outreach, a title that had been created specifically for him. His salary was 3 times what he'd made as a janitor, and his office, an actual office with a window, was on the same floor as the executive team. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Some board members had questioned Margaret's decision to hire someone with no administrative background. Others wondered if a former janitor could effectively represent Meridian to outside organizations. But Margaret had been unwavering in her support, and Elliot had worked tirelessly to prove her faith wasn't misplaced. "Have you seen Margaret?" Elliot asked, glancing around the increasingly crowded lobby. "Still in a meeting upstairs," Patrick replied. "She said she'll be down 5 minutes before start time." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Rumor has it she's announcing something big today." Before Elliot could ask what he meant, Vivian from HR appeared at his elbow. "The news crews are set up outside," she said. "They'd like a quick word with you before we begin, if you're comfortable with that." Elliot nodded, though public speaking still didn't come as naturally to him as playing. But he'd learned to handle interviews over the past months as interest in the program grew. Local news had picked up the story, janitor turned arts director, and the unexpected publicity had actually helped secure additional funding from businesses wanting to be associated with the feel-good narrative. As he followed Vivian toward the entrance where reporters waited, Elliot caught sight of a familiar face. Chen Li, his former supervisor on the cleaning staff, gave him a thumbs up from across the lobby. Elliot had insisted that the maintenance and cleaning teams be given prime seats and extended lunch breaks for the concert. Those had been his colleagues for 12 years, and he hadn't forgotten them in his new position. The brief interviews passed in a blur of questions about the program's future and his unusual career path. Elliot kept his answers simple and focused on the program rather than himself, ending with an invitation for everyone to come inside as the performance would begin soon. Back in the lobby, almost every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and by the elevator banks. Elliot made his way toward the piano, stopping to shake hands and exchange greetings. 6 months of meetings and presentations had gradually worn away his initial shyness. He wasn't exactly comfortable in the spotlight, but he no longer felt like an imposter. A hush fell over the crowd as Margaret appeared, elegant in a deep blue suit that Elliot recognized from the night she'd discovered him playing. She moved to the center of the performance area with the confidence that had first intimidated him and now inspired him. "Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural performance of the Meridian Lunchtime Concert Series," she began, her voice carrying easily through the lobby without a microphone. "Today marks the official launch of a program that has already begun changing lives across our city." She spoke briefly about the 6 music schools now receiving funding, the after-school programs established in neighborhoods where arts education had been cut, and the scholarship fund for promising young musicians. As she talked, Elliot marveled at how quickly their late-night conversation in the diner had evolved into something so substantial. "None of this would have been possible," Margaret continued, "without the vision and talent of one person who showed us what was possible when we truly listened to the music around us." She turned toward Elliot, her expression warm. "When I jokingly said 6 months ago that I'd marry anyone who could play Chopin beautifully, I never expected to find not just extraordinary talent, but an extraordinary person who would change how I see our company and my life." A ripple of amused murmurs ran through the audience. The story of Margaret's offhand remark had become part of company folklore, though few knew the full details of that rainy night when Elliot had played the piano after hours. "I'd like to invite Elliot Chen to the piano now," Margaret said, gesturing toward him. "And while he won't be receiving a marriage proposal today," this brought laughter from the crowd, "he will be receiving something else." Elliot moved to the piano, curiosity mingling with the pre-performance focus that had returned to him over months of playing regularly again. His hands were stronger now, the stiffness eased by the physical therapy Margaret had insisted the company insurance cover. He still wasn't the pianist he had been at 30, but he had found a new maturity in his playing that came from life experience no conservatory could teach. As he sat at the bench, adjusting its height slightly, Margaret approached, with a small wooden box. "Before you play," she said, her voice now pitched just for him, though the crowd could still hear, "I wanted to give you this." Elliot accepted the box, opening it carefully. Inside was a key. Not an ordinary house or car key, but an older, more ornate one made of polished brass. "What's this?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Margaret smiled. "The key to our future." She turned back to the audience. "I'm pleased to announce that Meridian Investments has purchased the old Thompson building on Pine Street. Beginning next month, it will undergo renovations to become the new home of the Meridian Community Music School." Gasps and applause greeted this announcement. The Thompson building was a historic structure that had sat empty for years, a beautiful space with excellent acoustics that had once housed a small theater. "This school," Margaret continued over the applause, "will provide free and low-cost music education to students of all ages, with scholarship programs for promising musicians who wish to pursue further studies. And I'm even more pleased to announce that Elliot Chen has agreed to serve as its first director." Elliot looked up in shock. They had discussed the possibility of a music school in their planning sessions, but he had no idea Margaret had moved forward with purchasing a building. And she certainly hadn't mentioned him as its director. The audience burst into enthusiastic applause as Margaret leaned down to whisper, "Surprise. We can discuss the details later, but say yes. Please." Elliot found himself nodding, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. From janitor to concert pianist to arts administrator to school director, life had come full circle in the most unexpected way. As the applause died down, he collected himself and placed his hands on the keys. Today he would not play Chopin's Nocturne. That piece remained special, almost private between him and Margaret. Instead, he had chosen Debussy's Clair de Lune, its gentle opening notes bringing immediate silence to the crowded lobby. As he played, Elliot saw Margaret take a seat in the front row, her eyes never leaving him. In the month since that rainy night, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Not a romance, though there was deep affection, but a partnership based on shared vision and mutual respect. She had given him a second chance at a career in music. He had given her a way to honor her grandfather's legacy, while creating something meaningful beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. The music swelled and receded like waves, filling the towering lobby space. Elliot glanced up briefly to see faces rapt with attention, executives who had once passed him without a glance, maintenance workers who had been his friends for years, guests experiencing the power of live music perhaps for the first time. In that moment, he understood that this was about more than his personal redemption. It was about what happened when people truly saw each other, when talent was recognized regardless of job title or uniform. As the final notes of Debussy faded into the hushed lobby, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began. Elliot rose from the bench, bowing slightly as the audience stood. His eyes found Margaret's, and the look they exchanged held all that didn't need to be said aloud. No. There would be no marriage proposal today. What they had built together was, perhaps more meaningful, a legacy that would touch countless lives through music, a partnership founded on recognizing the extraordinary in what others overlooked. As Elliot prepared to play his second piece, he thought of his daughter May, of how proud she was of the legacy he was building that she could one day continue if she chose. He thought of his wife Lynn, who had always believed in his talent, even when he set it aside for their family. And he thought of the unlikely journey that had brought him here, from cleaning floors to creating futures, all because one rainy night he had dared to play Chopin on a grand piano when he thought no one was listening.